Hello, my name is Chloe, and today I will be presenting my Innovative Solutions project entitled Empty Plate. So, starting with the issue that my project aims to address, the disorder I chose to focus on is anorexia nervosa, which is an eating disorder characterized by food restriction, distorted body image, and an intense fear of weight gain. It also happens to be one of the most fatal mental health conditions. According to one meta-analysis from 2011, roughly 5% of people diagnosed with anorexia pass away 10 years after receiving their diagnosis. This is a significantly higher mortality rate than many other psychiatric disorders. Here on the right is a chart comparing the standardized mortality ratios of the various psychiatric disorders compared in this meta-analysis. So, bulimia, eating disorder not otherwise specified, also known as OSFED now, schizophrenia, and major depression. And this just kind of underscores the severity of anorexia in itself. This is a deadly disorder. It's not to be taken lightly. But to add another layer to this issue, stigma makes the recovery process even more of a challenge than it already is. And this stigma predominantly takes two forms. So there's public stigma, which reduces anorexia to vanity. Oh, this person just wants to be thin. Or reduces it to personal choice, which is a common stigma narrative with many psychiatric disorders, that these individuals are simply choosing to be sick. And then there's self-stigma, where individuals with anorexia internalize these public stigma narratives, often leading to feelings of shame or the feeling that one is unworthy of receiving help, so a real barrier to recovery. And my project focuses specifically on reaching college students and young adults, as this group is highly vulnerable to not only eating disorders, but also messages of stigma. So getting into my design process, I started this project with both personal reflection and external research. As someone with lived experience with anorexia, I already understood a lot of the stigma surrounding this disorder firsthand, unfortunately. But I also know that my experience is not the universal experience. Each person's eating disorder looks a little different, something that I became familiar with in treatment. So I also decided to do some outside research for this project as well, and this included things like reading first-person blogs and recovery forums and using resources from the National Eating Disorders Association, NEDA, to gain a deeper understanding of the issue at hand. I did learn a lot of this information prior in educational groups and treatment, but it was nice to get a refresher and also get updated on some new developments since I've been out. Furthermore, it is important to note that my MHFA training in this course enforced the importance of trauma-sensitive language, and this reminded me of how language in treatment programs I was in was often censored. For instance, we couldn't talk about calories or weights or specific disordered behaviors, to avoid triggering disordered thinking in group therapy participants. So MHFA reminded me that I needed to be really cognizant of triggering language while designing this project. And based on my personal experience and the research and training I just mentioned, I defined the central problem I am aiming to tackle as society's tendency to dehumanize or trivialize anorexia, leading to the persistence of both public and self-stigma surrounding this disorder. Harmful myths such as anorexia is a choice or it's just about vanity oversimplify what is actually a very complex condition. And these misconceptions often are responsible for isolating people living with this disorder and ultimately delaying their recovery. I learned early on in treatment that anorexia is a condition that thrives in isolation, like many psychiatric disorders. So my goal became creating a project that makes the invisible struggles of someone living with anorexia visible in a way that is safe and stigma reducing. And during my brainstorming and sorting through what could best help me achieve this goal, I came up with several possible solutions. These included a blog where individuals with this disorder could write and post letters to their younger selves, an interactive digital poster, which would be a smiling face with a bunch of seemingly empty text bubbles around it, and then when you clicked on these bubbles, it would reveal several common disordered thoughts of someone with anorexia, kind of highlighting how we suffer in silence. Another idea was a digital Zine that would just bust common myths about anorexia. And one of my last ideas was a video series called Mirror Talks, wherein individuals with this with anorexia are those recovered from it which share their personal narratives in front of a mirror. I ultimately chose the empty plate initiative that I'm about to discuss because it best balanced emotional resonance with feasibility. Its symbolic use of plates creates a strong visual impact, which some of my other ideas were lacking, while it also remains accessible and practical to implement, more so than some of my other options, which might have required considerably more resources to implement. All right, so the Empty Plate Initiative is an art installation. Ideally, it would be an on-campus installation. I'm thinking in a cafeteria or another high-traffic area, but it could also be implemented in an online format, which I like that there is that option. And the installation would consist of several empty plates, hence the name, with real anonymous quotes from individuals living with anorexia that represent what living with the disorder is often like. I would, of course, vet these quotes for triggering language, and most importantly, each plate would also feature a QR code linking to educational materials or recovery resources relevant to the quote on the plate. So you can see this not so pretty prototype of my concept, and since I couldn't collect anonymous quotes for this mock-up, I just used a couple thoughts that I had when I was sick or common thought patterns that I heard from peers and groups. Ideally, I would have much prettier thrifted plates that would be hand-painted by maybe local artists or students in an art class or club on campus, and I would shoot for about 20 to 30 plates in total. So for the QR codes, I said I would want them to link to relevant sources to the quote on the plate. So take, for example, the plate that says, "I'm not that sick." This could link to some articles that discuss the issue of how common anosognosia is with anorexia. And this is an individual's inability to see how sick they are or even accept that they are sick at all. The plate that discusses uncomfortability with the look of one's thighs, which is right here, could link to some articles that discuss body dysmorphia or education on body image issues, or therapists in the area who work on body image specifically, or books that address working through body dysmorphia. Or take the plate that ends with a sentiment, "I feel so alone." That QR code can link to virtual support groups or support groups in the area for anorexia. So this initiative really tackles both the stigmas I discussed earlier. It reduces public stigma by, one, exposing what this disorder actually looks like for someone suffering from it, as it would display real thoughts from those with the disorder. And two, it also reduces public stigma by sharing educational resources on different facets of anorexia with the general public. Furthermore, it reduces self-stigma by showing those with the disorder that they are definitely not alone in their thinking patterns. Someone might walk through this exhibit and think, "Oh my gosh, this sounds like me," and that would really help tackle that isolation issue that I discussed earlier on in this presentation. And furthermore, the recovery resources provided by the QR codes in this installation could help show that help is not only available, but deserved. All right. So if I was able to make this prototype a reality, my first step would be getting approval from campus authorities to display this installation. Then I would collect quotes anonymously through secure online forms, really making sure to protect the individual privacy of participants. And I would vet these quotes with a team before deciding which ones to include in this exhibit, being sure to rule out any that might potentially be triggering for anorexic attendees. Then I would ask if student artists could help paint these quotes onto thrifted plates, and then display the collection in a high traffic area, ideally a cafeteria, as I think it would add to the message. I would also track engagement through QR scans and a brief questionnaire that would be placed at the end of my exhibit to collect feedback on the display's emotional impact and effectiveness. This way I could tweak it if need be. To make sure this project was truly innovative, I conducted several searches on Google, YouTube, Pinterest, Instagram, and TEDx. I also reviewed awareness campaigns done by NEDA, Project Heal, and Active Minds. I found no campaigns using plates as a symbolic storytelling tool for reducing anorexia stigma. Now, evidence suggests that interventions engaging audiences emotionally rather than solely informationally are more effective in reducing stigma. So this confirmed for me that Empty Plate fills a unique gap. It engages audiences emotionally via its public art aspect, and it also provides an educational component, which I saw a lot of campaigns doing one or the other for anorexia, but not both. It is important to note that I drew inspiration from several similar projects, though. Active Minds' Send Silence packing installation discussed in this course that uses backpacks to raise awareness about suicide inspired the art installation piece of my project. And the National Eating Disorder Association's awareness toolkits and Project HEAL's sharing of recovery stories online inspired the inclusion of education and narrative sharing in the Empty Plate installation. Lastly, I want to say that this project has been deeply meaningful to me as someone who has been recovered now for a couple years. Since I have been recovered, I've always wanted to step back into the eating disorder world to help those who are still struggling, because when I was in treatment, the only people that I felt really understood me were the ones who had been through it or were still going through it. And I think that kind of speaks to how big of an issue stigma and misunderstanding is when it comes to anorexia. But I really appreciate how this project allowed me to transform a difficult personal history into a creative form of advocacy. The biggest challenge I faced was probably balancing emotional impact with trauma sensitivity and feasibility, but through this process I learned that effective advocacy requires empathy, creativity, and careful design, something that I think will definitely help me with the aforementioned work I want to do. Lastly, here are the references I used in developing this project, including research on stigma reduction and examples of similar awareness campaigns. Thank you. It's been a great semester.